Johnny Carson ruled late-night TV with a sharp wit and smooth charm that millions adored. For 3 decades, he turned tense moments into laughs and tricky guests into gold. Most of the time. But even the unshakable king had his limits. Behind the curtain, there were stars who rubbed him the wrong way so badly it led to off-air tension, lasting grudges, and a few never invited back. So who managed to rattle Johnny Carson so much that, at 79, he still remembered their names. Let's dive into all 8. Number 8. Frank Sinatra. Johnny Carson was a master of calm, cool on the surface, sharp underneath, and always ready with a quick-witted save. But when Frank Sinatra entered the picture, even Carson's famously steady grip on The Tonight Show could get a little shaky. Frank didn't just arrive at NBC studios, he descended. His team came ahead, adjusting room temperatures, installing teleprompters, and reserving space for up to a dozen of his friends along the side of the stage. NBC security didn't log him in casually. They wrote his arrival in bold, block letters, as if bracing for a royal visit. Carson, who liked things tidy and predictable, knew what was coming: showtime, on Sinatra's terms. And while Johnny appreciated the power of a great guest, he also understood that hosting wasn't just about who sat in the chair. It was about balance, timing, control. Sinatra, on the other hand, lived by his own rhythm. If something didn't suit him, he showed it. Whether it was a mispronounced name from a junior producer who was reportedly escorted out by a bodyguard, or a lighting cue he didn't like, Frank had ways of letting the team know. Carson, ever the gentleman on screen, might laugh it off, but behind closed doors, the stress was clear. His assistants noticed. He'd pour himself an extra scotch on those nights, muttering half-jokes like, "Chairman of the board. Sure, but I still sign the network paychecks." One of the most unforgettable moments came in 1976. Carson was midway through a peanut allergy joke during his monologue when, out of nowhere, Sinatra strolled onto the stage, arm draped over Johnny's shoulder. The audience erupted. 40 seconds of thunderous applause. Carson, blinking through it, turned and quipped, "Do you need the whole show, Frank?" Sinatra winked. "Only till the band packs up." It was iconic. It was electric, and it drove Carson up the wall. To viewers at home, it looked spontaneous, charming even. But to Johnny, it was a clear flex. The monologue was sacred ground, where the host set the night's tone. Sinatra, however, had just taken a slice of it with zero warning. It wasn't the first time he'd done something like it, and Johnny suspected it wouldn't be the last. Yet Carson never let the tension show on air. He'd introduce Sinatra with genuine warmth, steer the interview toward safe memories, nostalgic talk about the Rat Pack or old performances, carefully dodging any landmines like political squabbles, mob rumors, or Sinatra's rocky love life. The ratings soared every time, but so did Carson's blood pressure. In truth, Carson knew exactly what Sinatra brought to the table: buzz, prestige, a sense of occasion. He wasn't about to throw that away over a few backstage headaches. But beneath the polished smiles and studio applause, a quiet war was being fought. One part of Johnny wanted to honor the legend. The other had a show to run. And while Carson wore the crown of late-night television, even he sometimes had to bow, if only for a moment, to the unmatched gravity of Frank Sinatra. In the end, Johnny handled it the only way he knew how: with grace, with wit, and with the quiet understanding that not all legends follow the rules. But if that name caught you off guard, just wait until you see who else made the list. Number 7. Chevy Chase. Johnny Carson had an unmatched gift for putting guests at ease, guiding interviews with humor, charm, and just the right touch of authority. But not everyone who sat across from him fit neatly into the Tonight Show rhythm. One guest in particular often upset the balance: Chevy Chase. While millions knew Chase as a breakout comedy star from Saturday Night Live in the 1970s, Carson saw something different behind the sarcasm and smirks. It wasn't just that Chase was famous. Carson regularly welcomed big names with even bigger egos. What made Chase difficult was the way he carried that fame. His style of humor, laced with deadpan delivery and biting sarcasm, lacked the warmth Carson valued in his guests. Viewers tuned in expecting witty exchanges and good-natured teasing. But when Chase was in the chair, the energy in the room often turned cold, awkward. His jabs didn't land like friendly jokes. They felt personal, even mean-spirited. Carson, who mastered the art of making his guests look good while still getting laughs, struggled when the dynamic shifted. He knew how to dance with sharp-witted personalities, but he didn't enjoy when the spotlight turned into a one-man act, especially one that seemed to challenge his presence as host. And that's what Chase often projected. His confident swagger, even when subtle, sent a clear message. He wasn't just there to play along. He was there to be the star. Whispers around NBC suggested Carson viewed the younger comedian as more than just difficult. He saw him as a potential rival. Chase, after all, wasn't shy about his ambition. As one of the early faces of SNL, he quickly became a household name and, for a time, was seen by some in the industry as a possible heir to late-night television. That idea didn't sit well with Carson, who had built The Tonight Show into a nightly institution and didn't take kindly to anyone treating his stage like a stepping stone. While Carson never publicly spoke harshly of Chase, insiders noted the lack of warmth between them. Their conversations lacked the playful spark seen with other guests. And when the cameras stopped rolling, the distance only grew. In a world where timing, tone, and mutual respect shaped every successful segment, Chase simply disrupted the flow. And for Carson, the master of smooth television, some guests just weren't worth the friction. But what made the next guest quiet? Composure even more unnerving to Carson than Chevy Chase's ego? Stay glued to your screen. Number 6. Fred Rogers. If Chevy Chase tested Carson's patience, then Fred Rogers quietly dismantled his rhythm. Where Chase brought too much ego to The Tonight Show, Mr. Rogers brought none at all. And somehow, that still left Johnny Carson disoriented. It should have been a safe booking. On paper, the idea looked charming. Pair late-night sharpest host with the warmest man on television. Even the show memo promised a 5-minute light segment. Maybe a puppet or two, nothing too heavy. But the moment Fred Rogers stepped into the studio lights, the entire tone shifted. He didn't rush onto the stage or ride the wave of applause like most guests. He strolled, paused center stage, and gave the audience a gentle, "Thank you very much, friends. I'm very glad to be here." The crowd clapped, unsure if he was finished. The crew scrambled to cue applause, but the delay lingered. Timing, that invisible pulse that kept Carson's show ticking like a clock, suddenly slipped a beat. Johnny tried to lighten the moment. He lifted his foot and revealed a surprise pair of white sneakers. "Fred, I wore these in your honor," he said with a grin. Fred folded his hands, smiled softly, and replied, "That's very thoughtful, Johnny. Sneakers can help us feel ready to play." The studio audience chuckled politely, waiting for the host to volley back. But Carson said nothing. Rogers had genuinely meant what he said. No punchline, no setup, just kindness. And in late-night television, that felt like a full stop. Carson pivoted quickly. He asked for funny fan mail stories, maybe a goofy moment with kids. But Rogers didn't do funny for the sake of laughs. He offered a quiet story about a child afraid of bathtub drains and how imagination can turn fear into understanding. Each sentence landed with calm clarity, his words spaced like lullabies. Perfect for toddlers. Not great for 11:45 p.m. Behind the scenes, stopwatch hands twitched nervously. The carefully stacked monologue and planned jokes were slipping out of sync. Writers scratched jokes off cue cards. Directors widened the camera shots to fill visual space. And Carson, one of the best in the business, sat nodding politely while sweating beneath his collar. The unwritten rule was clear. You don't make fun of Fred Rogers. His presence was too pure, too respected. Treating him like any other guest risked coming off cruel. But Carson also couldn't fully engage him like he would a fast-talking actor or an outrageous comedian. The Usual banter didn't work. The rhythm was broken. Viewers at home felt the stillness as warmth. Stagehands behind the curtain felt it as panic. When the commercial finally rolled, Carson exhaled. Hard, visibly relieved. The crew dubbed the moment a pacing disaster. Nielsen reports revealed a noticeable dip during Rogers' segment. Laugh counters, yes, they really used hand clickers to track laughs, registered less than half the chuckles compared to the previous night's animal bit. The verdict, a sweet segment, but a slow one. And yet, something unexpected happened. The next day, the show's mailroom overflowed. Hundreds of handwritten letters poured in, many from parents who had never stayed up late but had that night, at their kids' insistence. They weren't praising the jokes. They were thanking The Tonight Show for giving Mr. Rogers a moment, a chance, a seat at the grown-up table. Fred de Cordova, Carson's longtime producer, saw it as a trade-off. We gained goodwill, he admitted, just not momentum. So adjustments followed. Next time Rogers appeared, it was during the December holiday stretch, when audiences were softer and more nostalgic. Writers trimmed Carson's opening monologue by 2 jokes to allow breathing room. They encouraged Rogers to bring props, his little red trolley, a puppet or 2, just so Johnny had something to riff off. And still, behind the scenes, precautions remained. Directors kept a musical act warmed up in the wings, just in case pacing lagged. Carson always stayed courteous. He'd shake Fred's hand, thank him sincerely, and walk off smiling. But once, after a particularly gentle segment, he leaned to a stage manager and whispered, "Book him after a stand-up next time, not before. Daddy needs caffeine after that." Years later, when asked privately which guest had been the hardest to interview, not the most difficult, but the most challenging, Carson reportedly smiled and said, "Fred Rogers. Wonderful man. But it's the only time I kept checking the clock and my pulse at the same time." Where Chevy Chase had overwhelmed Carson with ego, Fred Rogers had disarmed him with silence. And in that silence, something honest and a little awkward revealed itself. 2 legends, sharing a stage, both brilliant, both kind, and both utterly out of sync. But what happens when a king of improved is forced to play by someone else's script? Stay tuned to find out who is next. Number 5. Bob Hope. Bob Hope, long considered NBC's crown jewel, came onto The Tonight Show with more than just charm. He brought a fully loaded script. His team, always one step ahead, would send thick envelopes of pre-approved jokes, interview prompts, and camera directions days before his appearance. Carson, who lived for unscripted brilliance and organic laughs, was left boxed in, reduced to a cue card operator in his own house. Hope didn't make eye contact during their chats. His gaze locked onto the cue cards, propped behind the cameras, waiting for Carson to feed him the next line so he could fire off a pre-packaged punchline. Even when Carson veered off script with a spontaneous follow-up, Hope didn't flinch. He simply blinked, shuffled his cards, and delivered the joke as written, ignoring the new direction entirely. The audience chuckled out of habit, but the spark wasn't there. Behind his desk, Carson's pencil trembled in his grip, the frustration barely hidden. It wasn't just the forced rhythm that grated on Carson. It was the relentless promotion. Hope rarely offered a personal story or a fresh memory. Instead, each visit became an infomercial. During a 1978 appearance, he name-dropped Texaco 3 times in under 10 minutes. Carson, trying to salvage the energy, quipped, "Texaco gets more airtime than I do." It owned a laugh, but everyone in the room could hear the weariness in his voice. One staff member recalled him muttering backstage, "I'm the warm-up act for corporate sponsorship." What made things worse was that Hope wasn't just a guest. He was a fixture. Whether or not he had something new to share, NBC kept inviting him back. He drew in older viewers, and his specials brought in millions. When Carson tried to cut down Hope's appearances and suggested newer, fresher comedians, executives gently reminded him who was keeping the lights on. Carson reluctantly gave in, but with conditions. From then on, Hope's visits were strategically buffered. Producers scheduled a musical act or a more spontaneous guest to follow, someone who could pump life back into the room. But the tension was still felt. Staff noticed it like clockwork. Every time Hope walked into the building, the air in Carson's dressing room dropped 10 degrees. That chill wasn't stage fright. It was a resignation. Off camera, there was no open feud. They were polite. Carson smiled. Hope joked. And NBC kept cashing the checks. But anyone watching closely could tell. Behind the practiced ease of Johnny's grin was a man waiting for the clock to run out. Despite Hope's legendary status, his appearances on The Tonight Show became a reminder that not every icon fits into every spotlight. For Carson, who thrived on spontaneity and soul, Hope's visits became less about connection and more about obligation. The rhythm was off. The melody never quite landed. And for a host who played best when he could improvise, that made all the difference.